Hello and welcome. My name is Donna Cryer. I am the founder and CEO of the Global Liver Institute, and I am so excited that you all are with us to recognize International NASH Day and to hear from the fantastic expert panel on NASH and obesity as part of this day. We are going to be discussing with some urgency the very serious disease of NASH, which is the more advanced form of fatty liver disease, non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, which hopefully many of you know, or if you do not, by the end of this episode, you will recognize that NASH affects more than 115 million people around the world. Today, you'll hear from many of our partners. Our theme is NASH around the world. So we'll be focusing on the experience of NASH in multiple countries and recognizing that NASH is, in fact, a global issue. I want to be able to give a specific thank you. We are honored that International NASH Day has received the endorsement of AASLD and EASL and the support of so many medical societies around the world. And we want to just recognize the work that all of our clinical partners have done and are doing on behalf of so many millions of patients, and we so appreciate their support on this day most of all. And we have with us today Dr. Manal Abdelmalek, we have Helena Cortez-Pinto, and Mazen Noureddin, representing multiple perspectives, clinical backgrounds, research backgrounds, in 2 different countries and connections to many more. So without further ado, Dr. Abdelmalek, welcome. Welcome to you all. Please feel free to say all of you say hello to our guests, to our listeners and watchers.
Oh, thank you very much, Donna. It is just an absolute honor to be here today. As you know, I'm Manal Abdelmalek. I'm at Duke University, and I have been so committed to this disease and this disease entity for over 2 decades, and it couldn't be more enriching for me to participate in this forum and to reach out to what really matters, which is all our patients and their providers who care for them. So I'm absolutely delighted to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm also delighted to be here. My name is Helena Cortez-Pinto, and I work in Lisbon in the Faculdade Medicina. I'm the coordinator of an hepatology unit, and I've been involved with EASL and also now with UEG. And in fact, my interest in NAFLD NASH, I'd say that has more than 2 decades. I'd say 3 decades, what makes me a little bit older. But in fact, in the 90s, in the early 90s, we were already getting interested in NAFLD NASH, and at that point, nobody was really caring. But in these recent years, it has been so impressive, not only in the way that so much papers have come out, so many clinical trials are ongoing, but the bad thing is that we are also seeing so many patients with advanced forms of NASH. That's really, really impressive. And of course, this has to do with increasing obesity and probably increasing diabetes. But it has really, in these 30 years, increased enormously. And although I think in the United States, it has been more like that, but now we are really starting to see this in our wards, so many cirrhotic NASH patients, and that's really something that impresses. But I'm very happy to be here and to be discussing what ways can we have to decrease and to avoid patients from reaching this advanced status, because I think that's one of the main issues.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you. And thank you to you all for your many years of work in this field. Although many people are learning about NASH just today, you all have been working for decades in this. And so I'm happy to recognize that and shine a spotlight. Dr. Nureddin.
So I'm Mazen Noureddin. I'm a hepatologist in the West Coast. I'm in Los Angeles, California, at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. I didn't start too late, actually. I started working on NASH slightly early in medical school. The reason why I don't tell the story too much, but my grandmother died from NASH cirrhosis in the 70s. It was called cryptogenic cirrhosis, and my father is a gastroenterologist. He taught in my medical school, and we have to do a thesis in medical school. So my thesis was in NASH and liver disease and diabetes and liver disease. So I did thesis on cryptogenic cirrhosis and diabetes back then in the 2002.
You were born to do that.
I guess.
Or at least raised
so yeah, then I went to do the Hep C because of my mentors, and then before I even finished fellowship, I went back to NASH, and I have been doing it since then.
Well, we're grateful for that. I talk so frequently over the 30 some years that I have been a GI and hepatology patient. And every time I get a chance to talk to a medical student, I'm just like, don't you want to go into gastroenterology? Don't you want to be a hepatologist? Let me tell you how fascinating the liver is and how fascinating hepatology is. And I hope that we've attracted a few, but I certainly can't trump raising them myself. Our kids are ENT surgeons and veterinarians, but there's always the third one, where she's still a work in progress. So maybe we'll have a hepatologist yet. Cool. So I wanted to start with the question I think that's on everybody's mind. What has changed in NASH and obesity over the past 12 months that we have been experiencing this COVID-19 pandemic? People have been on lockdown or quarantine, and it seems to me that they're somewhere on the extremes of a spectrum. Either you have you're an expert in making sourdough bread, and you've sort of eaten yourself into a COVID-19 pounds situation, or you're in the best health of your life, having found time not commuting to hike or walk your dogs or be on your Peloton bike or something. And so I'd love to ask each of you from your different regions of the world, how have you seen this COVID epidemic affect your patients and your work? Dr. Abdelmalek, start with you.
What has inspired me the most in the past year, while it's been a very challenging year, is the spirit of discovery, the spirit of innovation, the drive of the pharmaceutical industry and academia to continue work in this space has pushed forward. There have been wonderful discoveries, and I don't think it's fair to say that we don't understand this disease anymore. We used to call it poorly understood, poorly described, because we've come a very long way in understanding the pathogenesis of injury, its intimate association with metabolic pathways and risk factors, the mechanisms that drive fibrosis. And we've even in the past few months understood with more clarity how even control of metabolic risk factors, not just diabetes, is associated with NAFLD and NASH, but the level of your glycemic control. So I give a big kudos and a big shout out to everybody who's working in this space, in whatever compartments you're working in it, because I think COVID-19 has not dampened the spirit of discovery, and we've continued to push forward, even with clinical trials. While we've had a slowdown in enrollment, they have continued, and many of them are coming to successful fruition, which allows us more opportunities to talk about new therapies and new drugs for which we can move forward into later stage clinical trial development. So I found that all just very positive. Of course, we've learned the very serious and negative impact that acquiring COVID-19 can have on our patients with obesity and diabetes, and particularly for those who have hepatic fibrosis in the setting of NASH and NAFLD. So it has been a very challenging year, both for us as providers who care for patients with liver disease, and particularly who are working in the space of obesity and diabetes. And I couldn't emphasize more that if you are out there listening and a patient with fatty liver disease, the importance of keeping yourself protected and getting vaccinated, because many of us who care for patients have seen the detrimental effects of having our patients with chronic liver disease acquire COVID. So we've learned a lot about COVID in the liver, and we've continued to learn a lot about fatty liver disease in general. So it has been a very fulfilling, although challenging year.
I certainly know that all of you have been no less busy over the past 12 months. And I really appreciate that point about innovation continuing. So many patients, were afraid that the progress and momentum we were making in NASH drug development and NASH research would all come to a halt. And we know that, people's disease did not stop progressing for COVID. So the research and innovation could not as well. So Dr. Cortez-Pinto, what has been your experience?
Well, I would say in the patient's perspective, there has been this very detrimental effect of the confinement, resulting in most patients in a significant increase of weight. What has had some bad consequences is interesting because it's not global. It's not all patients that have increased their weight. Some patients really state that they were able to lose weight because they stopped going out to have dinner and doing all the social things they had to do. But in general, and we have this multidisciplinary clinic, and most of our patients have in fact increased weight. And this has had a bad effect on their disease. I also agree with Manal that in what relates to research, I think research has not stopped at all. I think everybody kept on doing the good work. And in fact, clinical trials, although were rather slowed, at least during the worst months, we had difficulty in getting the patients inside the hospital, but still the clinical trials went on. So I would not say that the effect was, I think it was negative on that aspect, but it was not totally negative. Another important thing that I would say that happened this year and still happening, it's the change of the name. The possibility of changing the name of NAFLD to MAFLD, to metabolic associated fatty liver disease, what has caused a great controversy. I don't know if this is the place or the time to discuss it, or what to our other panelists think about it. In fact, I was one of the authors of these first two papers trying to change the name. And in fact, this was something that was coming for a long time. This attempt to stop calling the disease with a negative name, and also taking out alcohol from the name. And as I think that we may have in this audience patients, and I hope so, and I really think that for patients, they look forward for a change of the name. But on the other hand, I have seen during this last month that there are some pros and cons. And one of the cons that I think it's quite important is the issue of the awareness, because now we were getting to the point where NAFLD was quite a well-known disease and name, and that the change of name may jeopardize at least partially this. So I think this is a controversy that's going on. An international group is trying to get a consensus and to get some concrete answers to these questions. But I think it's something that has agitated the scientific, the faculty that's really interested in this topic.
Everyone becomes interested in this topic, and being part of that group and working with several of the patients. And I really appreciate how patients now have been brought into this consensus process, because if we are going to change the name, having patients and patient advocates involved in as moving the field as a whole, and thinking about what is the right action to change, to not change. If we are going to change, is NAFLD the right name, or do we need something completely new and agnostic that we can, define holistically? I think it's a wonderful discussion to have as a community and go through the pros and cons, the reactions of all the stakeholder groups, from public health to our researchers and research sponsors and regulators, how a name may play out in various languages, if it's clinically accurate, if it's flexible and adaptive enough for all that we are learning about and will learn in the next few years and decades, and also how is it right now? NAFLD is very much constrained, and NASH is very much constrained by being defined by biopsy. And we've made so many innovations in non-invasive diagnostics. Is it helpful in moving this forward to take that out as a defining characteristics of the disease, so it can grow and scale to meet the needs of the hundreds of millions of people who are involved? So I think it's a fantastic conversation to have, and now that everyone is a part of it, I think it can be very fruitful and effective.
Yes. I just add that, in fact, for example, when there was this change of name from primary biliary cirrhosis to primary biliary cholangitis, this change in name was mostly suggested by patients. It was very much the patients that look forward for that. In that case, it was quite simple because the entity is more simple and everybody was in agreement. But just to tell you how important patients are in this kind of decisions and settings. So I'm happy that now we have patients and public health professionals dealing with this. And I hope that we will get to a consensus that will help moving the field forward.
Fantastic. Dr. Noureddin, the last 12 months.
That was definitely hot topic, changing names.
Well, it happens on, we've been doing 50 episodes of a live show between, the last IND and this. And so I find that being timely and topical only enhance the conversation. So
I'll give you my snapshot.
Aspect of this
I'll give you my snapshot. Dr. Abdelmalek and Dr. Cortez-Pinto summarized it beautifully. I will start with the glass quarter empty, which is the COVID-19. And they mentioned it beautifully. I will quote one study from JAMA Open Network that the average weight gain was about 1.5 pound over a month. I found a lot of my patients found comfort in baking for some reason. We actually found comfort in that in my house as well. A lot of people started baking because people found it you start a project, smells good, and you have it finished. And a lot of people started baking, and a lot of my friends around me started baking. So that pound and a half translated multiple 12 or whatever. We called it COVID 10 at the beginning, and it translated to COVID-19, 19 pounds. So we have to deal with that this year. And that increased the FibroScan parameters as well as the ALT. Manal and Dr. Cortez-Pinto mentioned the difficulties with the clinical trial, but truly let's move to the 3/4 full. I think I'll summarize it quickly into three things. I always break the field into three areas in terms of natural history. I think in terms of the natural histories, the most excited from my standpoint is the cost-effective studies that came out showing that screening is cost-effective, and I hope that will be taken in consideration in the next guidelines, hint to some colleagues here. The other things, I think the diagnostics made a lot of dents in the last year. So we have scores now that can be very meaningful and take over the biopsy. Fast, NIS4, we have MRI score in development, and some of the diagnostics showed correlation with outcomes that the FDA was asking for. Now it's there, so it can start replacing biopsy. And lastly, and I'm sure we're going to talk about this, many drugs now in phase 3 clinical trials, and some of the phase 2 drugs like semaglutide and lanifibranor, which are diabetes drugs, showed excellent results, and those are very promising. So that's the year to me in a glass 3/4 full.
I do want to pick up on the point about the increase in obesity experience, particularly the data on how many children have advanced from being overweight to obese, or obese to being, I guess, exceedingly obese. You don't want to put those labels on children, but the weight gain in children has been particularly dramatic, and I know many fatty liver disease clinics around the country and pediatric clinics have asked all of their children to come in for reassessment and talking with the families. And I think so often, if people do know anything about NASH, they think of it as something that develops over so many years, and it's only for an older population. We're finally getting people to recognize that it's a lot of working age people, but the number of children who are being diagnosed with NASH, and I would anticipate an increasing number after this pandemic, I think really is cause for additional alarm. Does anyone want to speak to that? I know we have a whole NASH in pediatrics panel. I don't want to preempt them, but I think it's very important here to put that in the entire context and all ages. Manal, you look like
Donna, this is a fascinating area. Pediatric obesity and NAFLD is really quite complex. It's not just all about diet and exercise. We've come to recognize that there are what we call epigenetic modifiers. In other words, the risk can be defined even before conception, just by the maternal risk factors of obesity and diabetes, or the presence of fatty liver disease in the mom of a newborn baby. It's almost like imprinting, and so it's become a unique area of focus to ensure that women of childbearing potential are in fact avoiding the risk factors for obesity and diabetes themselves. And then you add on top of it genetic risk factors such as unique genes. One of them is PNPLA3, for example, that can further increase risk. And then, of course, the environmental risk factors, the lack of exercise, the lack of parks and recreational time on a playground, let alone that we are, at least in this country, a very fast-moving society, and we tend to eat out of boxes, bags, bottles, and cans. And we have to move our children and ourselves as we're developing and planning families away from that paradigm. Otherwise, we're creating a far bigger generation, literally a bigger generation in the future, with much more health related outcomes than we're even seeing in our own generation now.
Absolutely. It's one of the reasons that we've launched the GLI NASH Council at the Milken Institute School of Public Health, because this is a public health issue. And as we've outlined in our NASH action plan, we're going to need public health solutions, community solutions, as you mentioned, about recess and playgrounds and nutrition, and setting up everyone for movement. We've had fantastic conversations with our NASH Council member of the American College of Sports Medicine about this. And, as one of your colleagues at Duke, Dr. Anna May Deal, who ensured that we reached out to ACOG and the American Academy of Pediatrics and our international colleagues in in women's health and pediatrics as well, to ensure that issue, starting in pregnancy, in healthy mothers, to have healthy children, to grow up well, is really how we will ultimately address NASH.
Can we also not also comment on the sugar in children? I think it's very huge issue in them as well. Manal, you published a lot of papers on fructose being a big factor. And I think sugar is a serious issue in this country. We say probably more than Europe, but it's an issue in Europe. From personal experience, I had my children, we looked for milk formula, and all the milk formula in the United States contained fructose, which we were quite surprised. And I gave the example of baking earlier. In my house, we started baking with almond flour, for instance, just to avoid. My wife is very strict with the sugar with my kid, because we have obesity in my side from the family. So she's very strict about the sugar with my daughter, to make sure she does not gain the weight during this time. So it's a huge issue, and there are a lot of effort, the My Plate effort, and writing the right portions and not eating sugar. But that's something that we really need to focus on seriously.
I think it's why we've added a culinary event to this year's International NASH Day, to help give people some more support and guidance on what is a NASH friendly, a NASH protective, and a liver healthy diet, because it's difficult. There's so many conflicting messages. Helena, I wanted to come to you because Europe does have stricter food regulations, and I have we look fondly on things being declared not food because they have too much sugar, or because they don't meet those regulations. And so we do look to lessons learned from you in Europe. Tell us a little bit more about what is going on.
Well, I have a particular experience in Portugal in 2017, so 4 years ago. It started a significant taxation of the sugar-sweetened beverages. And with that, it was impressive how the decrease in the consumption happened. Because even the producers changed the composition of their products so that they would not become so expensive. So I think that taxation could really have a role. Of course, it's not everything, but the experience is that it's like with alcohol. When you increase the taxes, you reduce availability and you reduce consumption. But just coming back to what Manal and Mazen said, I think that, of course, there are epigenetic and genetic factors, but I think that the environment and the education of children in order to prevent the childhood obesity is paramount, is of great importance. Because, for example, taste can be educated. And of course, if you get a child used to drink and eat sugar and salted food, you will get used to that and you will look forward for it. So you really need to change the habits very early. And this has to be something that all people become aware of the importance of educating the habits of the children. And I think there are also quite simple measures that can be done. For example, the campaign that was done some years ago with Michelle Obama with the Drink Up campaign about water. We tried to do something similar in Europe. We did not get yet funded to do it. But I think that the availability of water in very different settings, it's something that's so easy. And as I'm very aware of that, I often try to look if there is a way to buy water or to get water free in school, in the hospitals, in some public place. And if you see, usually it is not. And often it is more expensive to buy a bottle of water than to buy a bottle of Coke or of any sugared beverages. I think that this is a mix of trying to educate in the sense of people understand how they should change their habits, but also I think that there is a very, very strong effort from the industry, from the food industry, to impose their sugared food. And they know, for example, that if they make some cereals with a little bit more sugar, they are more easy to sell. So, and this is, I always compare with alcohol. We have an industry that is always working against us.
Well, I think, it's exciting to me, though. I love the connection between the health and the policy and the business incentives. And I think if we can align them towards health, we can have a great effect. And I think we've seen that where, companies are acquiring sort of their healthy food brands, or companies who have made soda also invest in water and making that available. And so, we've also seen the rise of, non-alcoholic brands to give people options, that taste good and sort of give them that same sort of social sense, but give them options that are healthier for them. So I always like to see how we can, rather than penalize when necessary, but how can we incentivize and make it a win for everybody to make the healthy choice, to invest in the in the health promoting business and services, to make it easier for people to nudge, to quote Cass Sunstein and his folks, but to nudge and to help support everybody in making healthy choices and healthy options easier and more available.
Because healthy food has to be nice to the palate. You have to like it. So you have to like it because you learn to like it early in life. And also you have to have, for example, good vegetables and good fruit. If and for that, again, the state should support better and less expensive vegetables and fruit. Because in fact, that can be very different. If you go to a bad supermarket or to a cheap supermarket, you can find very bad vegetables that are not appealing, or you can have very good vegetables and very good fruit. So I think there should be an effort to make this more healthy food available with good quality. I think the quality is something very, very important. But this is a long way to go.
Then pop-up farmers markets and sort of mobile grocery stores and food in states like Mississippi, where it's amazing. They grow a lot of food, but some folks in lower income areas don't have the same access to those healthy foods because they're shipped out. And so making sure that they are accessible and affordable in every neighborhood for every income, I think is a really important part of health equity conversations. And I wonder for Maz and Manal, Maz, you're in, Los Angeles, and Manal, Duke has so many community networks throughout North Carolina. If there are sort of outreach or community efforts that you're doing alongside of your clinical efforts that help people address all of these factors that lead into diabetes and obesity and NASH. Maz in LA, what's going on in LA?
Yeah, I mean, our effort has been focused around the identification, or although it's not recommended yet, we have been focused on the high-risk population, especially the type 2 diabetes, and getting the message out and telling these type 2 diabetes patients, especially at the age of 40 and above, that, hey, you might have a serious disease called NASH and cirrhotics. I mean, we have a lot of patients age of 42, 43. They show up on our step door with cirrhosis. So we're trying to get the message out there that maybe you want to start talking to your doctor about getting screened, and there's machines, there are tests, FIP4, FibroScan. Maybe you want to get that and look at this disease. We have a large Hispanic population in Los Angeles area. I know, like, we have a lot of Hollywood stars, but we also have a lot of overweight people too. So we're trying to get the message out there that maybe we should start screening the high-risk population.
Well, you can't manage or you can't treat what you don't look for. And
Indeed.
so on this issue of screening, I think you're right. It is counterproductive, outdated, and really harmful to patients to not even look for fatty liver disease and NASH, to start connecting them to imaging, to the treatments that we do have available, whether we're borrowing them from our colleagues in endocrinology or other areas. But if nothing else, so that they are ready to when a drug with a specific indication in the US and other countries outside of India becomes available for NASH, that we have those folks with wonderful clinicians like yourselves already identified and ready for that treatment. And so I just really can't say strongly enough how at this point in 2021 to not support screening for
my friend Naim Al-Khoury, when he was in the Cleveland Clinic, published data from the Cleveland Clinic showing that more than a quarter of the patients, NASH patients, their first symptom is decompensation. Who wants that? Like, your first symptom is ascites or hepatic encephalopathy. And Manal and Helena, I mean, you see this all day. Like, you have to go to the room and explain to the patient for the first time that the referring doctor who referred the patient to you did not tell the patient he has cirrhosis, and you're the one who has to break that news. And the patient sitting in front of you telling you, you're like, oh, I don't drink. And you're like,
Yeah.
we know you don't drink. Let me tell you what's this disease about. And you have to explain it to them.
Too many patients are identified with NASH when they hear that you have liver cancer or you need a transplant, and that's the first time they're hearing about it, unless they sort of think about there was a little inkling, oh there were some liver enzymes 10 years ago that the doctor or my doctor said there was some fatty liver disease, but don't worry about it. How much damage has don't worry about it done to people who then end up in your office with advanced disease, where the options then of what to do are limited, or they have so much more intensive than what we've discussed on the first part of this panel. Manal, do you want to speak to that a bit?
Yeah, no, this is an issue that comes up time and time again in our clinical practices. I mean, just 2 or 3 times this past week in seeing patients, I hear the story, I never even knew I had liver disease. Nobody even told me my liver enzymes were elevated. Now you're telling me I might need a liver transplant. We have so much we need to do from a widespread public health education, both of providers and our patients, such that the entity of chronic liver disease is recognized as integral to the metabolic syndrome as diabetes is. We see patients at risk for diabetes, we check a blood sugar. We see patients, we have to come to the recognition that these same patients are at risk for fatty liver disease, and we need to be checking and evaluating the health of the liver. In primary care and endocrinology, one could argue even more broadly in obesity clinics and bariatric clinics and cardiology clinics, as well as in GI and liver clinics. So we have a lot to do on that front, no doubt.
So let's be specific. So if a patient has a BMI of over 30, or you tell me the right number, or if they if they have diabetes, even just that factor alone, what should their endocrinologist or primary care doctor be doing, with and for that person, that patient?
If I can just give you a brief example. Also, this week I had a 61-year patient who came with GI bleeding from variceal bleeding. And his history was interesting because he had diabetes for the last 30 years, and he was overweight, around 30 of body mass index. And interestingly, his GP had done a liver biopsy in the year 2000 and had told him the patient was very well. And the doctor told him that he had steatohepatitis, that he had NASH. But no worry. Interestingly, even medicated him with UDCA, what he has done for the next 20 years. And then at a certain point, the patient developed thrombocytopenia, and the physician said, okay, go to the hematology. So we did not even consider that the patient was developing cirrhosis. And then when he came to us, and in fact, he had a full picture of cirrhosis, he was quite surprised because he knew that he had the fatty liver, but he thought that was no problem because he had it for the last 20 years. And interestingly, the GP never referred the patient to a specialist. So I think that one of the main issues that comes to what you just mentioned is the referral pathways. Which patients have to be referred to a specialist? And to do that, I think we have to have very simple algorithms to be used either by the GPs or the endocrinologists or the cardiologists. And whenever they see a patient that is either overweighted or has diabetes or has important dyslipidemia, all the risk factors of the metabolic syndrome, he has to screen them for having a fatty liver. And he can do the FIB4, he can do the NAFLD fibrosis score, or he can do, if he has the availability of having elastography, and then he has to refer the patients that really have any evidence of any degree of advanced fibrosis. And I think that if we get the GPs to do that, and we will then follow this group of patients, that is not this very large number of millions of patients with NAFLD, I think that's the only way to go and to avoid or to prevent these patients from, even if the GP is looking at them, but he really doesn't know exactly what to do. So for me, the referral pathways are fundamental.
So,
and and I think that each country has to define its guidelines of the referral pathways. The patient goes here and then goes there. Probably in the States, that is more difficult because you don't have so much of a healthcare system. But in most European countries, it can quite easily be done. But I'm sure that you also can do that.
Maz, you've been working on exactly that, on making it much more clear and simple for primary care and non-hepatologists to identify their NAFLD and NASH patients and to put them on the right track. So describe what you're doing.
There's a lot of wisdom in what Helena said. So I just want to walk through it in what we have done in just like evidence-based medicine, because there was this little bit debate between the EASL and ASLD, and no one was wrong, I think. In 3-4 years ago, there was a debate if screening should be implemented or not. So EASL took the stand that we're going to screen, there's no cost-effective data, yet this disease is overwhelming, dangerous. We're going to implement that now, and then we're going to look for cost-effectiveness. The ASLD said we don't have treatments yet, we don't have cost-effective analysis data, we're not implementing that yet. And I took it a project that took 2 years, and working with economists for a firm to look at that. So we looked at the cost-effectiveness data that was used before, and to give that group a credit, a lot of data accumulated since then, which is the following: that fibrosis at certain stage, which is F2 and higher, correlates with morbidity and mortality. So we use that piece. Other data started showing they did not use a lot of HCC data, transplant data. Zubair Younasi published what's called Markov models, meaning how the disease transition from back and forth. So we use these data. And what we found that in contrast to the previous cost effectiveness analysis data that they used biopsy to show cost effectiveness, we said that's not going to make any sense. Use liver biopsy to show cost effectiveness. It's quarter of the population. Let's use non-invasive testing, and you consider their sensitivity, specificity. You build it in the model, how much they miss, how much they don't miss. And we found that we took the type 2 diabetes only. The reason why the dyslipidemia and obese, the data is scattered. So we started with something solid, which is the type 2 diabetes. And we found that screening at age 55 and above is cost effective if you use FibroScan in that model. Then we projected it to age 40 and above, and it was cost effective. Now, of course, FIB4 will be cost effective because it's much cheaper than FibroScan. So we recommended in that paper that you need to screen age 40 and above all the type 2 diabetic patients. So that was based on economical model that is vetted by health economist analysis. And I do agree with you 100%, Helena, I back up that 100%. It should be easy, straightforward. We had in the discussion in that paper that was published in Gastro last year that to make it simple, primary care, they don't have an access FibroScan, just implement FIB4 for type 2 diabetes patient and make the referral, and that should be done.
You know, to put it simply for all our patients out there, if you are overweight, obese, age over 45 or 50, and certainly if you have a first-degree family member that has unexplained cirrhosis of any kind, cirrhosis of any type, then you should be cluing in your physicians to say, should I have my liver, the health of my liver evaluated? You know, all else aside about FIB4 and elastography and many of our fancy algorithms that we are developing, the message to our patients out there is if you have a family member with cirrhosis, you yourself are overweight or obese, and particularly even over the age of 45 to 50, ask your doctor.
Yes. And we will have on our website, on the globalliver.org, and on our International NASH Day website, a one-pager that people can bring in to their primary care doctors or their endocrinologists to help them with those conversations of, really summing up what we pointed out here, what the risk factors are, and if people bring this into their physicians to start the conversation, and to also help guide doctors who haven't really addressed NASH or managed NASH or been part of that diagnostic journey before, to help them understand, what to order and what those next steps are, and bridge some of the fantastic work that you all have been doing in hepatology and within your health systems and dedicated fatty liver disease clinics, and really reaching out to the GPs, the PCPs, the family physicians, the internal medicine folks who treat the vast majority of people who are walking around with some stage of NAFLD or NASH and just don't know it. And so I think it's incumbent upon all of us to make it as easy for everyone to take that next step, to take that action, to get screened, make it easy using whatever they have on hand within their clinic or system or area to do that, but really to take that action and not just ignore these risk factors and these signs and even subtle symptoms that people may be having, or slightly elevated liver enzymes. So we need to take action on this so that we can make available what we do have for patients. And I want to sort of end on that, on a sort of note of hope. What does management for a NASH patient look like right now? And and what's on the horizon? There are dietitians You have fabulous ones that I know and love, Manal. They're at Duke at your institution. So there are dietitians, there's bariatric surgery, there are weight loss medications. There are diabetes medications that we're applying. There are things that people can do now. Can we just have a sort of a quick discussion on those things, on the actions we can take, Helena?
Well, I think that I always start with the lifestyle measures. And in fact, we have a multidisciplinary team that is very effective. I remember when I worked alone, and now that I have the dietitian always working together, and that makes a lot of difference. I have a lot of hope in medications, for example, like the GLP-1 receptor agonists that have been shown in their first phase 2 trials, like semaglutide that was already mentioned, that can also lead to a reduction in weight and a decrease in several of the metabolic risk factors. And that I'm quite hoping that we are now starting this large phase 3 clinical trial. And then also other GLP-1 receptor agonists that I think can be quite promising. But for the moment, in fact, it's mostly the lifestyle measures and, of course, bariatric surgery also in the patients that have indication for bariatric surgery, not by itself. But we also have recent studies, for example, from the group of France, that shown fantastic results in those patients that really needed bariatric surgery to improve NASH. So, but I just mentioned these clinical trials, but there are dozens of clinical trials, and so.
But I think right now, where we are in the life cycle of the history of NASH, letting patients know that participating in a clinical trial, is part of sort of best practice management.
Yes.
That the care
Yes. Yes, and they look forward to go to the clinical trials. In fact, yeah.
Absolutely. Maz, you're doing research as well. So participating in clinical trials, helping to create the options of the future. What is the path? What is the path for?
Yeah, I just want to emphasize on one fact that, as you said, weight loss and exercise are very, very important. Cup of coffee is very, very important too, for all of us in the morning, and it's helpful for NASH. But I also want to emphasize that if I see this phenomena in cirrhotics and F3, cup of coffee is important, but it's not going to solve the problem. So some people still like beating on the fact, yeah, drink coffee, drink coffee. Let's extend the option also to reverse fibrosis with what Helena was talking about, the path for clinical trials. Let's not forget about some still, I mean, the guidelines still states for if you want to use vitamin E and all that, but now we have good options. Like the lanifibranol data showed good NASH resolution, good fibrosis improvement. Let's not forget that disease, a lot of people die from heart complications. So both semaglutide and lanifibranol are type 2 that they can target metabolic side effects, and they can hopefully improve the heart. So those are very encouraging. Let's not forget that there are drugs that are promising in phase 3, like resmetirom. I don't want to take too much time. I want to also give time to Manal, but there are hopefully on the horizon a cirrhosis drug that like the galactin-3 inhibitor, and I hope it's going to work. It looks there's a signal, and let's not forget the cirrhotic is much harder group, and the whole therapeutics is a large area that we need to talk about. Hopefully, OCA will get approved at one point. It's at least a start for our patients. There are FGFs. There's so many on the horizon. So the glass is 3/4 full, and there are drugs that can reverse even the metabolic, and help you losing weight, hopefully help the heart, and hopefully we'll see them in the next few years.
I just want to make a point, Manal, before you jump in that, I've experienced end-stage liver disease. I'm a transplant recipient, as I think everyone knows. And so I think lifestyle, which I spend a lot of time on, over the past, 25, 26 years since my transplant, certainly. But it's in addition to the medication. It's in addition to, I'm alive today and as, healthy and as, able to just focus on my, spin class personal record because I've stayed, one step behind the innovation. And so, taking my biologics, my medications, plus the lifestyle, so that it has the medications have the best chance of working, is why I'm alive and healthy today. And so, and I've talked with some of the NASH patients. There's at some stage there's not enough olive oil in the world. There's not enough coffee in the world to undo the damage. It's not an either or. You need the lifestyle plus, whatever, medications and other interventions to really get the full best, optimal outcome.
I think at the foundation of it all, we need strong multidisciplinary teams to care for our patients. We need to certainly address each and every one of the underlying risk factors for NAFLD and NASH. So high cholesterol needs to be treated, blood sugar needs to be optimized, weight needs to be improved, high blood pressure needs to be evaluated and treated, and integral to lifestyle modification and changes. And at the same time, I see clinical research as an extension of clinical care. It is not in lieu of clinical care.
Right.
And there is evidence that just optimizing these metabolic risk factors in and of themselves may have a benefit in improving the risk for fibrosis progression. And where clinical care stops is where clinical research begins. And I do believe we have multiple different compounds with different mechanisms of actions currently in phase 3 clinical trials, and certainly in the upcoming 5 years, we will hopefully see an FDA approval for one of them. So I think it's an exciting time to be in the area of liver disease. We've seen successes in treatment of viral hepatitis that have just revolutionized the risk of progression to cirrhosis and need for transplant. And we're going to see the next wave of therapeutics come to address fatty liver disease. So I think we are more than halfway there. And the next several years is going to hold a lot of new and innovative discoveries.
I think that's right, and I also think it's actually a circle. So often clinical research develop is described as this linear thing, but clinical research informs clinical practice. Clinical practice hopefully will inform new research questions, in not only in drug development but in nutrition and exercise, and all of which can be helpful to NASH. So as we sign off for this time and in NASH and obesity, what is the one takeaway you want your clinical colleagues to know or to do after today?
For me, it's awareness and good referral pathways of the patients in need. And then as the specialists, we can put them in clinical trials. We can deal with the different facets of their metabolic disease. So I think awareness and good referral pathways are the way to go. And also good policies in place in each country with clear guidelines to what this should be.
Manal?
I think the most important thing here is identification and risk stratification. We have to figure out who our patients who have F2 disease and higher are for the purposes of intervening early and modifying those risk factors and lending them access to care that may not otherwise be available in their community.
Dr. Noureddin?
Donna, this is for our colleagues.
This is for you. Yes, anyone with a MD degree who's listening.
Yeah. So I'm just going to say this is a very fast evolving field. We're having a lot of updates almost on a weekly basis. Keep up with them because there's almost every week a slide or two that they're news from important studies. Look at them, especially on the diagnostics areas. and the treatment. It's positive, and we're going to see a lot of new diagnostic tests and treatments in the next 2-3 years.
Great. So learn, identify, and refer. Got
Indeed.
it.
Yes.
That's fantastic advice here. So thank you, everyone who has listened to this, who has participated in our International NASH Day. Please join us for our other panels. You can find them on all of the social media that you have access to, and certainly on the Global Liver Institute website, globalliver.org.